You're someone with a vision for your practice, for your side hustle, and for your personal journey. But when it comes to establishing your path on how to get to where you want to be with your practice, things get a little messy. You're also someone who'd prefer to go in person instead of to groups and listening to everyone else's story. To me, it sounds like you could benefit from one on one consulting with our experienced practice of the practice consultants. From $5.95 a month and up, you can work with a consultant that will give you more direction and practical, tried and tested tips matched to you and your goals. For more information, visit practiceofthepractice.com/apply. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/apply. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1207. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast, where we help you build a thriving practice you absolutely love, and we help you build that life that you love. We have been doing a lot this year around your own wellness, around your own brain, around how do you as a therapist, as a counselor, as a coach, make sure that you're enacting the very things that we talk about on this show. That it's not just about building an awesome practice, but it's about, building an integrated life. When I think about today's episode, kind of thinking about feeding our brain enough creativity, um, there's times when I'm good at this, and there's other times that I'm not great at it. I think it was just yesterday. I had probably half an hour till I had to go pick up my youngest daughter from the elementary school. Was about to walk down there and get her, and I thought, well, okay, I'm done with work. I'm caught up on my email. My oldest daughter's doing the dishes and doing her homework and all that stuff. And I had this half hour to look in front of myself and say, well, what do I want to do? And we just had this cheapo like $10 table that was in our den that was just there to, put a drink on or put a magazine on. But one of the legs broke. It was just like a crappy like Target table that we bought at this store that has the stuff that doesn't sell at Target, they sell. So we always go there before we go to Target. But the top of it, so the leg broke, so it's really unusable as a table. So I took all the legs off and I taped off the sides, and I'm going to just paint on it. I'm going to paint it as if it's a wall hanging painting or something. I've been playing with watercolors. I've been playing with back with acrylics a little bit more too. And for me to take that half hour just for myself, as a single dad running a business who feels like I'm pulled in so many different directions, to just listen to the music for plants playlist on Spotify and to just paint the base layer of this was like, okay, it doesn't have to be this pace that I often find myself going at, which is why I'm so excited today about our conversation with Todd Henry. For nearly 20 years, Todd Henry has equipped leaders and creative pros to become the most valuable person in any room. He is the author of 7 books, including The Accidental Creative, Die Empty, and Herding Tigers, all awesome titles. I love when books have titles that you don't fully know what it's about, which have been translated into more than a dozen languages. He speaks internationally on creativity, productivity, passion for work, and generating brilliant ideas. And Todd's podcast, Daily Creative, has been downloaded more than 20 million times since 2005. Todd, welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast.
It is so good to be here, and thank you for that kind and generous intro. And I think I need to go paint the base layer of a table right now. That you've inspired me. That sounds like a wonderful experience.
It's so funny because we have this place called Merchandise Outlet, and it's like just they buy probably boxes of things that they don't even know what's in it. And so you never know. It's sort of like a thrift store, but it's all like just stuff that didn't sell other places. And some of the wackiest things are there, and they're usually so cheap. And it was so fulfilling to have this $10 table that was rejected by Target buyers. Then, we bought from this Merchandise Outlet, and then it, broke within a year. It had like particle board crappy in the inside. And now to think, this is going to become a painting, and to say even a canvas for $10 would be pretty cheap. And it's just, I love finding, I've been painting on a lot of like cardboard. We bought a TV, and I had this huge piece of cardboard, and I'm like, I'm going to paint on that. And I've just been enjoying painting on things that usually would just be thrown away.
I love that. It's this is one of my favorite holiday. We're recording this. I'm sorry, I know this isn't coming out until later. We're recording this a little bit early. One of my favorite holiday specials is the Charlie Brown Christmas special. Where they sort of rescue the lonely tree from the lot. And in some ways, there's something really magical that happens when you rescue something from its fate, and you sort of give it a new life. And I love that you do that. That is an act of generosity and creativity to give something a
Yeah.
second life.
I got this past summer I bought Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Act. And
Mm.
it was one thing he said in it that really stood out to me, and this is just paraphrasing, was he was talking about how when you go into art, if you're scared to destroy it or scared to take a risk with it because you might quote ruin the art, like you're never going to push yourself into something else. And for me, it was like that really freed me up to say, I'm gonna just start doing watercolors on cardboard because it's like this was something I was gonna recycle anyway. So I can just play with it. I can be creative. I can do, 10 or 15 paintings and it's just on this piece of cardboard. And it just has been so fun to say, if I just light this thing in a campfire, who cares? Like it's just I'm doing the act of creativity instead of having this end goal of like what's the product, which is such a capitalist way of thinking about art. And it just really like shifted the way that I think about creativity and art.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful way to think of it. I mean, so much 99% of art is process. And yet you're right, we often only think about the final sort of 1%, the finished product. This is true in the world that I live in, which is, I work with people who have to what I call create on demand. They have to go to work and solve problems and create things and design and write. And so often they are judged based upon the output of their work, but they're very rarely questioned about their process. Why did you make that decision? Help me understand your strategic intent here. And so much of art is process. It's the intuition and the decisions matter more than the finished product because that's what imbues meaning on what we do. And so, I think that when we're afraid to make a decision, like you said, when we're afraid we're afraid we're going to ruin something, it necessarily neuters our creative process. It neuters the artistic value that we imbue upon something that we do, whether that's, again, whether it's a relationship or a work of art, whatever it is, the refusal to sort of get our hands dirty and risk making mistakes, sort of the inability or the unwillingness to be brave and to make those kinds of decisions in the face of uncertainty in some ways leads to what a very sort of middle bandwidth kind of life where we don't really have the troughs, but we don't really have the peaks either. And that's not a very fulfilling way to live.
Mm. Now, a lot of our listeners might not even call themselves artists or creatives or musicians. They might be like, "Well, yeah, I do therapy with people." How do you see the intersection of creativity and business?
So I think you just called out something really important, which is that we often conflate the words creativity and art. So people think, well, I'm not creative because I don't make music or I don't paint or I don't sculpt or I don't, do something like that. I don't write poetry. But there's a difference between creativity and art. Creativity at the heart is just problem solving. That's all it is. And so if you have to solve problems, you have to be creative. This conversation is a creative act because we're improvising. We're sort of solving the problem of how to make this interesting. And I listen to what you say and I think, okay, what's the right next puzzle piece to put behind what you're saying to continue the conversation? That is a creative act. And so those of us who have to solve problems, and especially if we have to solve problems under pressure, we are creative professionals. We do have to create on demand, which means that we have to wrestle with uncertainty and we have to deal with a lot of the same dynamics that the quote unquote artists have to deal with every day. It's just that they're in a different medium, a different forum within which we have to do that. And so I would just encourage people if they think, well, I'm not creative because I'm not one of those people. No, it's not true. Everyone who has to solve problems is creative. You just happen to have a very specific medium within which you solve those problems.
Mm. So before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about, feeding our brain enough creativity. Um, for people that want to boost their creativity, their innovation, if they came to you and said, "How do I get more creative? How do I innovate more? How do I, find, better ways to think?" I mean, you've interviewed so many people with your podcast, and you've done so much of this work. How would you answer that?
So in my first book, which was called The Accidental Creative, I spelled out 5 key areas where we need to build practices in order to help us be prepared for those moments when we need to have a brilliant idea. Doesn't mean we will have a brilliant idea. It just sort of prepares us for that moment, and it increases the likelihood. And those 5 areas are focus, which is how we define the problems we're trying to solve. And there's some specific practices that I prescribe in each of these areas. So focus, relationships, which is how we connect with others and how we leverage our interpersonal dynamics to position ourselves to have breakthrough moments. Energy, which is how we manage not just our ability to divide up our work across our calendar, but how we manage our ability to bring emotional labor to our work, which is a term that Lewis Hyde originated, emotional labor to the work that we do. Stimuli, which is how we structure the stimulus in our environment to spark connections. And then finally, hours, which is how we leverage our time for effectiveness, not just efficiency. Most of us have a very efficiency minded approach to our time, meaning we're trying to squeeze as much value out of every hour that we can, or we stack meeting after meeting after meeting. The problem is that we're spending our time, but we're not investing it. And there's a difference between that. So that's really when we talk about time, we talk about hours, the fifth area. We're really talking about making investments that are going to pay off down the road in creative breakthroughs. But the fourth, to answer your question, the fourth of those is stimuli, which are all of the dots that we connect in order to form a new idea. Steve Jobs once famously quipped that creativity is just connecting things. And he's largely right in that basically any breakthrough, anything that seems like it's brand new, is typically just the combination of existing things in our world, in our environment, in our mind, into something new and valuable that solves a problem that we're trying to solve. Stephen Johnson, in his phenomenal book, Where Good Ideas Come From, borrowed a term from evolutionary biology. He called it the adjacent possible. When we're trying to solve a problem, we're trying to create, we're trying to innovate, what we're doing is we're pursuing the area all around the problem, the adjacent possible, all of the potential possibilities that are just adjacent to the problem that maybe haven't been explored. And we're playing with them, we're toying with them, we're connecting them, we're asking what if questions, we're trying to make intuitive leaps. And occasionally something clicks. And that's creativity. That's when a breakthrough occurs. That's when that aha moment happens. Now, the problem is that those breakthroughs are typically not momentary. They typically emerge over time. There's a dynamic I call slow emergence, which is how ideas
Mm.
typically evolve, which is they slowly emerge over time. I think Stephen Johnson called them intuitive hunches, right? That are like slow moving hunches that suddenly emerge into our consciousness, and we realize, oh, there's something here. But we've kind of suspected that there's something there, which is why we were playing around the area. Well, in order to facilitate those breakthroughs, we have to be mindful about being a good gatekeeper around what comes into our mind. You know, many of us were bombarded by stimulus all day. The algorithm has become incredibly adept at feeding us things that it knows we will engage with, whether or not those things are truly useful to us, inspiring, whether they make us happy, healthy, or anxious or fearful. The algorithm doesn't care. The algorithm is only chasing after engagement. And so if we're not mindful of the stimulus that we're allowing into our brain, it will affect our creative potential in all kinds of ways. An anxious, fearful mind is not a creative mind, because an anxious, fearful mind is set on survival. And when you're set on survival, you're looking for efficiency. You know, you're looking to conserve. You're looking to protect. You're not looking to innovate. You're not looking to take risks. You're not looking to make leaps. You're not looking to try to connect non-intuitive dots. And so we have to be very careful about what we allow into our mind. And one practice that I wrote about in the Accidental Creative, and we talk about often on the podcast, is having a dedicated time of study, having study time in your day. And it can be in the morning. For me, it's in the morning. It's 60 minutes in the morning. It's the first thing I do when I get up. I have 60 minutes of dedicated study time, and then thought and writing time to respond to what I've just read. So it could be in the morning, it could be in the evening, it could be over lunchtime, it could be anytime you want. But the important thing is, are you curating valuable, uplifting, challenging stimuli And are you regularly absorbing those stimuli to position you to be able to connect higher quality dots, to be able to think more systemically in your life? And many of us have become less than, I would say, less than purposeful about the kinds of stimulus that we're allowing into our life. We snack on proverbial stimulus junk food all day, but we're not really eating a nice, well rounded stimulus meal very often.
Mm. Yeah. So, what other habits do you have that fuel your own creativity?
Well, one thing that's adjacent to the study time that I just mentioned is simply having time to be alone with your thoughts. And this is something that I know it sounds kind of silly, and people think like alone with my thoughts. What do you mean, meditation? Like, should I buy a mat? Do I need to cross my legs? Should I say Om? And the answer is no. I mean, although that's fine if that's what you want to do, but what I do is I will spend some time reading, studying, absorbing ideas, usually from great thinkers or a collection. I have a collection of like daily books that I go through from great thinkers, or books with short chapters where I'll read a chapter a day over the course of several months. And then I'll spend time alone with my thoughts, meaning I sit there with no agenda. I'm not trying to do anything. I'm not trying to think about anything. And if something crosses my mind, I just sort of allow it to go, and I sort of pay attention to it, and I think about it and I consider it, and I have a notepad in my lap, and I sometimes I'll write it down. But I'm convinced that many leaders and many creative professionals are aren't even aware of what's on their mind because they never take time to be alone with their thoughts. And it
Mm.
perpetually surprises me the things that are on my mind that I had no idea were on my mind. Whether that be, a conflict with someone that I didn't even pay attention to. And then suddenly I realized, oh, you know what? Actually, maybe what I said bothered them. Maybe I should follow up with them and make sure that everything is okay. Or it could be, you know what? I think that person was trying to invite me to, come collaborate with them, and I kind of blew it off. I need to pay attention to that. Or just ideas or connections or other things that are going on, little hunches that I have that I'm not paying attention to because I'm too busy. I'm bouncing from thing to thing, from obligation to obligation, stimulus to stimulus. And so just having that dedicated time in the morning with with my notebook in front of me to jot down idea. Well, technically it's my iPad, but with my Apple Pencil. But just having that in front of me to be able to jot down those thoughts or ideas is incredibly important. And I can't tell you, Joe, how many times the breakthrough that I'm looking for in my business, with a project, with a client, with the book I'm working on, has come out of that time of just allowing my thoughts to surface. And on a related note, another practice that I do is I keep a list, what I call an ongoing list of tensions, meaning there are a lot of things in our world and in our work that are obligations, they're tasks, they're projects. We have to get them done. Maybe we're doing a sprint. We're trying to get this project done over the next 2 weeks or whatever it is. And those are pretty easy to quantify. And you can say, like, I'm going to do this task this day, this task the next day. And then there are things in our world and in our work, especially in creative work, where we're solving problems, um, where it's just a tension that we have to live with and we're trying to resolve, and there's no solution to it, and there's nothing we can really even do about it yet because we're waiting for that inevitable breakthrough. We're waiting for that moment where the answer to the tension or the key that unlocks the tension is revealed. So what I do is I keep a list of those tensions. I actually have a database of those tensions, and I review them every morning as part of my practice. And I just look at them, and I don't even necessarily do anything about them, but I'm just reminding myself, okay, this exists, it's there, I'm going to feel this occasionally. I'm going to have that ping in my gut of, oh, I need to do something about that. No, it's okay, it's there. I know it's there. Occasionally I'll pull one of them out of the list and I'll say, okay, this week I'm going to focus on this tension, I'm going to resolve this tension. But just being aware of what's on my mind and those tensions that exist has been immensely valuable. Just psychologically, it's been invaluable because we are often oppressed not so much by the weight of all of the work that we have to do, but we're oppressed by the weight of what's undone. We're oppressed psychologically by the weight of the unresolved tensions, the unsolved problems, the things we need to break through on. So just keeping a list of those and reviewing them routinely has been tremendously, I would say, psychologically helpful to me as I approach my own work, my own practice, my own creative process.
So awesome. Listen, I didn't take insurance in my counseling practice because I had no idea how to handle it. The process of accepting insurance outside of a group practice can be tough, but most people looking for mental health care want to use their benefits to pay for sessions. If you're like me and you feel a little scared about taking insurance, or you just want to make it easier on yourself and you're interested in seeing clients through insurance, Alma can help. They make it easy to get credentialed with major insurance plans at enhanced reimbursement rates. They also handle all the paperwork, from eligibility checks to claim submission and guaranteed payment within 2 weeks. Plus, when you join Alma, you'll get access to time-saving tools for intake, scheduling, treatment plans, progress notes, and more in their included platform. It's going to make it so much easier for your team, so you can spend less time on administrative work and more time offering great care to your clients. Visit helloalma.com/Joe. That's helloalma.com/Joe to get started. Now, when you work with individuals or companies, what are some of the barriers you see in regards to people's creativity and just like unlocking that?
So there's a term that was coined by Steve Blank in an article for Harvard Business Review. He called it innovation theater. Innovation theater means that we want the appearance of innovation, we want the appearance of breakthrough ideas, of new innovative thought, but we don't want to deal with the mess of that. And so companies do all kinds of theater to make it look like they're innovating, to make it look like they're coming up with ideas. They'll say all kinds of things like, we are risk takers, we forge new ground, we don't do the same thing twice. But really, what we really want you to do is kind of do the same thing we did last time, just tweak it a little bit, right? And so the one of the biggest barriers that I encounter in organizations is just that, there's a misalignment of what we say and what we do. There's a dissonance that exists inside of organizations between our expressed values and what we actually measure, our metrics, our KPIs. And that misalignment is very demotivating to a person who just wants to do great work, who wants to take risks, who wants to try things, and is willing to bear the risk of those or bear the consequences of those risks they want to take. But so much of what we do inside of organizations is theater. And so part of what I do when I come into an organization, when I'm working with a company, is I help leaders identify, okay, let's identify, first of all, where is there a gap between what you're saying and what you're doing? Where is there a gap between the why and the what of your work? Where is there a gap between your expressed intent and the values that you say that you actually live out? And how can we close that gap so that people can be more holistic in their approach to their work, so that what we say is what we do? And there are times, Joe, when we just need to say, hey, you know what? You're a professional, you're a mercenary, and you just need to crank something out because that's what's called for in this circumstance. And as a professional, that's what you need to do. And there are times when we need to really swing for the fence and we need to really take some risks and try some things. As long as we're clear about when each of those circumstances is upon us, typically people are okay. People are professionals; they can deal with it. It's when we use all of this big talk and we talk a big game about risk and creativity and innovation. We're going to try new things. We're going to change the world, but really we're just going to kind of all try to keep our job, right?
Mhm.
That's when people get frustrated. And so much of the work that I do is helping leaders align their words and their actions, and then helping creative teams understand some of those inevitable pitfalls and dynamics of doing creative work in a collaborative environment, and helping them build some practices together to move beyond those pitfalls.
Mm. Now, I feel like in our organization, as well as many that I work with, um, there's a tension oftentimes between creative and kind of the operations of a business, where the creative is often nonlinear. It's harder to track. To say like, here's your KPI. I want you to, creatively make these types of things. Versus kind of the operational side is often more meticulous and like step by step. How do you see forward-leaning companies or individuals kind of push into that tension and maybe work more collaboratively within that tension?
You 100% you expressed it the right way, which is it is attention. In Herding Tigers, my book about creative leadership, I wrote about the two primary things that every talented, ambitious, creative professional needs. The first is stability. Talented people want a stable playing field on which to do their work because there has to be some stability undergirding their wild, imaginative, creative work. You know, creative pros sometimes rail against the rules and the regulations of the organization or the systems, but they love it when those paychecks come every 2 weeks, right? So, we need stability, which means clarity of process. I know that the process isn't going to shift halfway through. I know that there is a predictable process within which I will be doing this work so that I can focus my finite creative bandwidth on resolving the work itself, not trying to figure out the process. So we need stability of process, clarity of expectations, and we need to be able to trust one another that if you ask me to do something, that you're going to be there protecting me. You're going to protect the resources I need to be able to do it. And you're not going to throw me under the bus. Right. So that's stability. But the second thing talented, ambitious people need is more, really, as much as anything, is challenge. Challenge means we want to be pushed. We want to try new things. We want to venture into new territory. We want to take risks. We want to grow our skills. We want to introduce new ideas into uncomfortable environments. Talented and ambitious people want to push the boundaries of what they're capable of. Well, those two things exist in tension with one another. So uh, the problem for many leaders is we have to figure out when we get into a situation where we have a high challenge, low stability environment, which is a lot of organizations that are trying to do ambitious things. How do we bring more stability into our process, more clarity of process, more clarity of expectations, relational clarity, resources, resource allocation? How do we bring more stability so that people feel like they have what they need to do their best work? Or when we get into an environment where you have high stability but low challenge because the work has become predictable. We've gotten really good at what we're doing. It's mostly the same thing. Well, talented, ambitious people start to feel stuck in that space. And so how do we provide more challenge for the organization, for creative pros, so that they feel like they're stretching themselves, they're developing new skills, they're trying new things, they have permission to take risks. So if you are someone listening to this who feels either stuck or anxious and frustrated and maybe even angry that you're being asked to do things, but you're not being resourced and supported in doing those things, you can ask yourself the question, what would it take for me to have, like, if you're anxious, if you're over challenged, what would it take for me to have the stability that I need to be able to feel like I can do the work I'm being asked to do? If you feel stuck, ask yourself, what would challenge me right now? What can I ask for? What kinds of roles or opportunities could I ask for that would give me the ability to be able to challenge myself, to push myself? And sometimes that won't come through your work. Sometimes it has to come outside of work. Sometimes you have to, think of your life as a portfolio, not, sort of a one asset class, kind of thing. But I think it's important that we cultivate the self-awareness to be able to recognize when we're slipping into that high challenge, low stability, or low challenge, high stability zone, and be able to ask for what we need to get ourselves out of it.
Mm. Yeah, I think that just that idea of um, that it doesn't have to be pass fail. That it's like it's a process that we're iterating, that we're noticing that it's not like, oh man, I've given up my creativity. As kids, I have a 10-year-old and 13-year-old, and they both love art. They love music. They love tinkering around on the piano. And when we get into like middle school and high school, and people start to kind of go their own paths, it's like, well, those are the artsy kids, those are the drama kids, those are the science kids, and it's so unfortunate that we hold on to that image even into adulthood. Like, yeah, I used to love drawing, but I'm not that good at it anymore. Or even just being creative within our own process in our business. Um, what what are some things that you think can help light up just even more of that personal creativity outside of work? Because I personally believe that being in an improv troupe and doing watercolors and going on adventures in nature, that informs my business mind. But I don't do it for my business mind. It's not like I go do improv thinking,
Right.
"Ooh, what can I bring back to the podcast?" It's like, no, I just do it because I freaking love it, and I laugh so hard and don't need to do sit-ups to keep my tummy tight because I laugh so hard. It's like,
Right.
what are other things that people can do to kind of push into just that creativity outside of maybe even the work world?
Yeah. So what you're talking about when you talk about your improv troupe is something that I call back burner creating. In the Accidental Creative, I called it unnecessary creating. I've taken to calling it back burner creating, which means finding things that light your fire, that excite you, that you can do outside of your work. Things that allow you to express your creativity in a relatively low risk way. Develop new skills, try new things, experiment. For me, so part of my work history is, I went to college, like many people do, and then immediately decided I think I'm going to make a run as a singer songwriter. So I spent the first several years out of college as a traveling singer songwriter. And music was my main thing. It's how I made my living. I spent all my days writing music. That was kind of my way of being creatively expressive. And then the next phase of my career was as a creative director inside of an organization, and music took a back seat professionally, but it became my back burner creating, right? That became the way that I could express myself. Now, when it was my on demand job, I sometimes hated writing songs, right? I hated
Hmm.
having to pick up the guitar. I hated having to, I mean, I didn't hate having to go on stage, but it was like, it felt like this thing I have to do to pay the bills. And now it's kind of this back burner love, this back burner passion that I have, this creative passion that I have. So I encourage people to find some way of expressing yourself. You look at great leaders throughout history, almost all of them had some way that they creatively expressed themselves outside of their core leadership role. And if you ask, many people today, many people who are um, leaders of organizations, they'll tell you the same, that they have some way of expressing themselves, or taking risks, or trying things, or developing skills outside of their work that enables them to be creatively expressive. And for people who I'll tell you, I know of one musician and producer, is a huge producer, who has taken up woodworking, right, as a way to kind of keep himself creatively expressive. And my thing to him was like, hey, please just take care of your hands, right? Because I
Hmm.
don't want you, please don't let anything happen to your hands, because he's also a phenomenal guitarist. But like, I think everyone, even people who are in traditionally quote unquote creative roles, need to have some way of creatively expressing themselves outside of their on demand role. That's how we keep our creative pilot light lit. And the second thing I'd encourage people to do is what I call a stimulus dive, which is something I also wrote about in The Accidental Creative. And I've done this with teams where we've gone out and looked for ideas. I've led dumpster dives in New York City, where we're trying to develop a brand strategy. I've sent people out into the neighborhood to take 5 photos that tell the story of their brand, and then come back and like use those 5 photos as stimulus to help them solve the problem. But also, we've gone to art museums, we've gone to baseball games, like just doing something that gets you outside of your normal routine and allows you to experience the world through a new lens, to do something that's outside of your routine. And it sounds so incredibly obvious, and yet nobody does it because we're so busy, and we're aiming for efficiency. And so I think when we shift our perspective from how can I live the most efficient day possible to how can I ensure that the outcome of this day is effective, it completely changes our perspective about how we use time and energy, where we allocate our focus, and the kinds of things that we allow into our mind. Creativity is not efficient, but it doesn't waste anything. And I think that's a principle that we all have to embrace if we truly want to do our best work.
Mm. Todd, so awesome. The last question I always ask is, if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
Um, there is a real push in our culture, especially as we are kind of into this emerging technological age with artificial intelligence and the hyper optimization of everything, um, to think of ourselves and treat ourselves like machines. And my encouragement to you is recognize you're not a machine. first of all, that you're a living, breathing being who has ebb and flow, and you have rhythm to your life. There are seasons to your life. There are ups and downs and ebbs and flows. And that means that you have to care for yourself like you would care for a living thing. You would care for a plant. You would care for an animal, right? Like you have to recognize that there are ebbs and flows to your creativity, ebbs and flows to your effectiveness, to your mental acuity, your sharpness, and there are going to be ebbs and flows to your productivity. And that's perfectly okay. Because as I mentioned earlier, in our effort to try to cut off the troughs, we often unintentionally cut off the peaks as well. If you try to cut off the troughs, you often don't achieve the kinds of mental breakthroughs, the kind of creative breakthroughs that you're seeking. And so just embrace the rhythm of your life and know that it's okay for you to occasionally have moments where you're just taking care of yourself because that's the most important thing. And there are going to be seasons where you have to completely sprint and give everything you have because the thing you're chasing after is more important than any potential sacrifice you're making along the way. But that can't be all the time. So you have to care for yourself. So just embrace the rhythm of life and make sure that you're taking care of yourself because you're not a machine.
Mm, so awesome. Todd, if people want to connect with you, if they want to follow your work, where should we send them?
ToddHenry.com is my website. You can find my speaking, my books, a podcast. Podcast is called Daily Creative. Started it in 2005, and I thought I was late to the game in 2005. So kind of shows you how little I know. But yeah, you can listen to Daily Creative wherever. And we actually just recently rebranded it Daily Creative. It was called The Accidental Creative up until January of this year. We rebranded it about a year ago. But yeah, we've been doing this for a very long time. So check out Daily Creative or visit toddhenry.com.
So awesome. Thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you so much.
I want to challenge you to pick one thing that you've been trying. My neighbor, John, he's become a good friend of mine. But we would walk our kids to school together. So my sister lives in my neighborhood, and John and Hillary live just right up the road. And we all kind of walk our kids down around the same time to the elementary school. And, we had chit-chatted here and there. And then one day I said, there's a improv for fun group that's starting in January. Would love for you to come out and check it out. And he's like, I've always wanted to try improv. And as we've got to know each other, he told me that he, for the last year in the lead up to his 40th birthday, has tried one new thing every single month. So he started taking guitar lessons. Recently, he put together a stand-up comedy script that he kind of performed to me and got feedback, and he's going to be performing it. And, it's just such an inspiration to have, a friend who is pushing himself to just try new things. I think about my kids. My 10-year-old a couple months ago said, I want to try Taekwondo. And I'm like, that's awesome. And then she's like, I want to try cello. And just that idea of we don't have to be good at it. We can just go try things. So I want to encourage you, take a little bit of what we talked about today, take a little bit of inspiration from my neighbor, John, and think about, is there one thing that you just want to try? And maybe it makes your stomach flip a little bit and you're a little nervous. That's probably a good thing. Thank you so much to Alma for being our sponsor today. I wish Alma had been around when I had my private practice. I had no idea what I was doing. That's why I didn't take insurance. But if Alma had been there, I would have. And there's no reason that as a clinician, you should be spending hours on paperwork to bill for insurance, or not knowing for sure that you'll get reimbursed for sessions with your clients. If you're interested in seeing clients through insurance, but don't want to navigate the process and paperwork on your own, Alma can help. They make it easy to get credentialed with major insurance plans at enhanced reimbursement rates and a guaranteed payment within 2 weeks. Visit helloalma.com/Joe. That's hello, ALMA.com/Joe to get started. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.